the biological explanation for OCD. The specification says genetic and neural explanations for OCD. So if you get a question on this on the exam about why people get OCD, it's going to be on these biological explanations, and it gives you these two different reasons. One is genetics, so that's saying you've inherited OCD from the genes of your parents. Your genes are coding, if you will, for OCD. So the genetic explanation is the first thing. You're going to say you've inherited these genes, but then you're going to say it's polygenic, and that means lots of different genes. And in fact, there's over 230 different genes that are thought to code for OCD. So that's why OCD displays itself in different ways. Some people might have hoarding disorder where they can't throw anything away. Some people might have where they have to wash their hands all the time because they're obsessive about germs. Some people might have religious mania or religious obsession. That doesn't mean you're normal people who go to church or the mosque or wherever they go. That doesn't mean anyone who's spiritual. It means people where religion dominates their life and could even become dangerous because they start attacking other people who don't believe the way that they do. Or it just means it consumes them in every single part of their life, because that's what OCD does. It consumes you. It doesn't matter whether that's hoarding disorder or religious obsession. But what we're getting at is that OCD is polygenic, and that's why we see these different displays of behaviour, but it's all OCD. So that's the first thing you're saying. There might be over 230 different genes. Now, the good thing is you don't need to know about all of those genes. You only actually have to know about 2 of them. So the first gene that you're going to think of is the COMT gene. It's spelt COMT, the COMT gene. Now, everybody has a COMT gene. It's useful, you need one, because it regulates the neurotransmitter dopamine. But if you've got a faulty COMT gene, if you've got a variation of that COMT gene that is not working correctly, that means that you're not you're not regulating that neurotransmitter of dopamine correctly. And what happens is you end up with too much dopamine. The levels are really, really high in the brain, and that's not good. Because although dopamine is a fantastic neurotransmitter, it's one of my favourites. Although it's a really good one, if you've got too much, you don't want too much of that because it gives you psychosis. Too much dopamine, psychosis, that means you lose touch with reality. You don't know what's real and what's not. So if you've got a faulty COMT gene, if you think about that OCD cycle, and at the top you've got obsessions, those obsessions, those intrusive thoughts, they start to feel real. So that's why the faulty COMT gene is causing OCD, or thought to, one of the possible explanations. Got too much dopamine, so those obsessions feel real. So the next gene that you need to look at is the SERT gene, spelled SERT. The SERT gene, everybody's got a SERT gene because it regulates serotonin, that neurotransmitter called serotonin. And you know that you want serotonin because it gives you that calm mind and that balanced mood. So if you've got a faulty SERT gene, you're not going to have enough serotonin. There's lower levels of serotonin in the synapse. And the problem there is that you're going to feel anxious. Have a look at that OCD cycle. Draw it. You've got obsession at the top, leads into anxiety, leads into compulsion, leads into relief. And that goes round in a cycle, round and round. So if you've not got enough serotonin, then you're going to feel overwhelmingly anxious because you are not calm. You have not got a balanced mind. And there's another problem with low levels of serotonin, which we'll look at in a moment. But that genetic heritability, you've inherited that faulty SERT gene, that could lead to OCD. So that's your genetic explanations. It's polygenic. You got a faulty COMT gene, too much dopamine. You got a faulty SERT gene, too little serotonin. And then we look at the neural explanations. And the first bit really is what we've just been talking about. It's that you've got too high levels of dopamine. But what you need to say here is what it does, how they know this. So they injected animals. Now I'm guessing they injected rats because that's what they always do, isn't it? If they can get away with it. So they would have injected rats with dopamine. So they got really high levels of it. And those rats showed stereotypical movements similar to the compulsions of people with OCD. So think about that. What would those rats be doing? I'm thinking they're going to be like overly washing. They're going to be grooming themselves like over and over and over, like someone with OCD might wash their hands, or they might check their cage over and over. So those stereotypical movements, the same as the compulsions of people with OCD. And then you look at 2 lower levels of serotonin. So when you've got lower levels of serotonin, we're thinking that's what causes it. And the way they kind of discovered this, or the way they kind of suggested that's the case, is they gave people antidepressants that targeted serotonin. Now, you'll know they're called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So when people took SSRIs, their OCD symptoms were relieved. But when they took other antidepressants that didn't target serotonin, they didn't treat the OCD. So that's telling us, isn't it? It's telling us that it is the lower levels of serotonin that's causing it. So the last bit about neural explanations. Now, I said these lower levels of serotonin have got a problem. When you've got lower levels of serotonin, not only does your anxiety feel overwhelming, but it means that there are 2 areas of the brain that are not going to function properly. Now, these 2 areas of annoying, they've got annoying names because it's part of the brain. So listen hard. It's called the caudate nucleus. That's the first part of the brain that's going to malfunction if there's not enough serotonin. The caudate nucleus. Say it, write it down, whatever, look it up. The caudate nucleus is not going to function properly. But also another part of the brain called the orbitofrontal cortex. Okay? You've got the orbitofrontal cortex. Those 2 areas of the brain are going to malfunction if your serotonin is really low. But why is that a problem? And that is a problem because those 2 areas of the brain are responsible for sending worry signals to the thalamus, which is another part of the brain. So if your orbitofrontal cortex and your caudate nucleus are working correctly, it's going to send major worries to the thalamus to decide what to do with that worry. But if you've got low levels of serotonin, those 2 areas of the brain are malfunctioning. So not only are they sending major worries, but they're sending minor worries. Those minor worries get sent to the thalamus. Now the thalamus acts like a relay. Whatever it doesn't need, it just sends it straight back again. So that minor worry gets sent to the thalamus, and the thalamus goes, that's not a worry. So instead of sending it to the amygdala to deal with the stress, it just sends it straight back to the orbitofrontal cortex and the caudate nucleus. So those 2 areas of the brain are going, oh no, it's a worry. They send it back to the thalamus, and the thalamus sends it back to those parts of the brain, the caudate nucleus and the orbitofrontal cortex. And what you can imagine here, imagine drawing a little circle in your head, and with your finger, get your finger and draw a little circle. Because the low levels of serotonin are causing this faulty brain circuit where the orbitofrontal cortex and the caudate nucleus keep sending these minor worries to the thalamus, and the thalamus keeps sending these worries back. And so you get this circuit, and that's where you get, so this is called abnormal brain circuits, and that is causing OCD symptoms. Now it's where people do all those check-in behaviours. So like if I don't turn my hair straighteners off, I'll go and have a look, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've turned them off, and that's it. Someone with OCD will go and check and check and check again. They are not satisfied. They have to do it many times. Now it's this, I think, from what I can gather, it's this abnormal brain circuit that's causing that. I might be wrong, but in the exam, that's what you need to write. You need to write that the orbitofrontal cortex and the caudate nucleus send those minor worries to the thalamus that send them back, causing that abnormal brain circuit. And that's it for the AO1. I'm going to do the AO3 in a different section.